My name is Rochelle Goodwin. I am with WVU and also have been helping to support the West Virginia Forward Initiative over the course of the last year. So it's been my pleasure to get to know not only the body of work that President Gee has just been talking about, that roadmap as we move forward, and our champion partners at WVU, Marshall, and Commerce, but many of you. And as I look across the audience, I see Natalie, I see the Adjutant General, I see our representatives from higher education, Dr. Hill. We see lots of our congressional offices represented, lots of people that we have leaned on over the course of the last year for help as West Virginia Forward launches and for advice. So what we wanted to do today is talk about how some of the West Virginia Forward initiatives will fit into your conversation tomorrow on education. And I know it's a late hour, so we're going to hopefully give you some new information. This is about the hour of bedtime for my kids. I appreciate that you're all here. My husband and I are both products of public education. We are children of public education school teachers. We are now public education parents. My little one at bedtime right now is always asked, we ask them as we put them to bed, to tell us 3 things you're grateful for. And the other night, our just turned 7-year-old said, you know, I got 3 presents from God and I'm grateful for those. One is that I'm really good at art. And another one is that I'm excellent at music and I can really sing. And the last one is that my hair brushes itself in the morning. And if you could have seen the nest on her head, that may be a misread on a gift from God. But on the singing aptitude, she does sing all day, every single day. She's the background music to our life. And I have to tell you, President, that she sings songs that she makes up, Anna Vale Goodwin originals, and they're about West Virginia Forward. And I asked her, what is West Virginia Forward? She said, I don't know, but it sounds great, and you talk about it all the time, Mama. So we're going to talk about West Virginia Forward, and we want to start out, Secretary, with you. You bring to this panel a unique perspective, not just because you started and grew your own business to a successful endeavor that reached outside of the borders of West Virginia, but now you are wearing a government hat. Yes. And so one of the things that we want to hear your perspective from a government and from a business owner's vantage point is something that President Gee alluded to and Provost McConnell alluded to, which is that talent pool, that human capital piece of the equation, which is really relevant to education and as we advance through tomorrow. So they told us to look at the talent pool pipeline, so K-12 and beyond, who's coming through that pipeline, to look at our current assets, who's in the workforce right now. Do we have enough folks in the workforce, the right kinds of people in the workforce? And then how can we reach back, and when we have success in industries and need to fill good positions with talent, it may not be within our borders, how do we pull people in? And you have, under your purview as Secretary, some human capital and resource, human resource and workforce issues at your disposal, but you also go beyond that, and you've started having conversations with others. So tell us your perspective on that.
Well, there's a lot of different things we could talk about relative to workforce, but let's start with immediate sort of things. It's been really sort of a banner year this year. I think we've had a tremendous number of announcements. For instance, fundamentally, we're going to rebrand West Virginia. And we're doing that initially through our tourism department. And then ultimately, that rebranding will flow through to the economic development component of what we do. We very much believe that tourism is just at its absolute infancy in terms of the potential that exists. If you look at West Virginia and all the states that surround it, our tourism revenues are less than half of the next to last entity, and that's the state of Kentucky. And our revenues are less than half of what Kentucky is. I've spent a lot of time traveling around this country and the world, and one thing I have become convinced is that West Virginia is a wonderful place to spend a vacation. And so we fundamentally believe we can dramatically change that needle. When we do that, that's going to create lots of opportunities in the tourism industry. We've sort of upgraded our state parks, and we've got a good website. So we're filling up now for the first time our rooms and our cabins for the first time in the history of the state. Both Leaf weekends, every single room and cabin was rented in West Virginia, and that's the first time ever in the history of the state that's ever happened. We need more people to be able to do that. We look at forestry. We're going to increase the rate of trees that we cut by over 20-fold, and we still will not cut trees as fast as they're growing. And that's going to generate tremendous jobs in the lumber industry, and we're beginning to attract those finished added products. So there are great growths in that opportunity. When you look at just the fact that we have these shale gas reservoirs, there are a number of opportunities that are going to present themselves. We talk about the highway jobs and how huge that's going to be. I think that's been estimated at somewhere around $40,000+ jobs that will come from the highways. But in fact, the pipelines that we're going to put in are almost 4 times the magnitude, dollar value, of the highways that are coming in. Now, they're not going to be as labor intensive as the highway construction is, but they're going to have tremendous demand on our resources for employment. Then you look at the sort of announcements the Commerce Department has made. We've announced 16 new companies coming to West Virginia. They cover the gamut. They very much diversify what we do and who we are and how we, with the products that we produce. And so there's that wide diversification, all of which are going to result in about another 2,000 employees without any multipliers. So when you look at that, you wish for success and you hope for it, and then when you get it, you realize, geez, I've got a real problem here. And we do have a real problem here. We have a substantial void in the talented workforce that we have, and we have some significant scrambling to do right out of the chute just to address those immediate sorts of needs that we have. I work in close collaboration with General Hoyer. He constantly has ideas about how we can train people to get employed at various things. So the immediate need is trying to fill these positions that we have with these immediate new businesses and these pipelines and the roadways. But the real problem goes significantly deeper. When you try to attract business, one of the top 3 items is your workforce. So if we are successful in attracting businesses, and I fundamentally believe it will be extremely successful, at the same time, on a parallel course, we have got to rethink how we educate our workforce. We have more people giving workforce training per capita than anybody else in the country. I know we decided to get together a group that really focused on workforce training, and so we started with Steve Payne, our superintendent of schools, because there's tremendous job-specific training that goes in our K through 12 training. Got Sarah Tucker, who's the chancellor of CTC, the Community and Technical Colleges, spread across the state. We brought in my workforce training, Russell Fry, who gets almost $60 million a year for workforce training. Brought in Bill Crouch, who runs the Department of Health and Human Services, who has a larger budget than anybody else for workforce training. So what I found is that we have a just tremendous different opportunities to train, often duplicitous in nature and not streamlined and not really focused. So I think fundamentally this legislature should consider taking a step back, really looking about how we train our workforce. Are we doing it in the most efficient manner that a business person would approach, or are we doing it for other reasons? And my guess is when you do that, you're going to probably realign some institutions in West Virginia, and often that's, you're not supposed to tread there, but I think you really need to go to the core of this. So I think fundamentally we need to rethink about how we train workforce. You talk about workforce from other places. First, when we talk about existing people, we need to start educating kids in grade school and middle school about, don't get mad at me, but you don't have to go to college. There are other alternatives to employment than a 4-year degree. Those are where the real void is today in our society with what we're doing. Now, the second thing you got to do is you really have to think about, how do I meet that immediate need? That's why General Hoyer championed getting a waiver of benefits that are paid to veterans. And so West Virginia becomes a very attractive place for them to relocate to. And I believe we're going to be able to pull in a number of veterans that are going to give immediate help to our workforce needs. We have the lowest women workforce participation in the country. This is a huge resource that we are squandering and absolutely needs to be targeted specifically to bring women into the workforce. One thing we're doing is coding training. And that, when somebody is a coder now, most of those folks reside in Silicon Valley and other places where software development takes place, and they cost in excess of 6 figures. But we can have coders here at significantly less salary, and it's perfect sort of a work that a woman in home can still do and still make a living. So I think fundamentally we better recognize with the success are going to come tremendous workforce challenges. Now, we have to be willing to back up and really make those hard changes in order to have results. And I think that's what this West Virginia Forward study has done. It has taken an honest look at the problems we have without being biased one way or the other, without worrying about political considerations, but fundamentally looking at how we do our job. And I think when you read it, you see they call for some very fundamental changes. So I believe if we're really going to have this success continue and multiply on itself, we had better get that flow of human capital starting with kids in grade school and produce it all the way through, or we will not be able to sustain these initial gains that we've received.
Thank you, Secretary. The Secretary mentioned a few things worth underscoring. I know Tech Connect recently had, a couple weeks ago, a coding conference and really had an emphasis on how, Anne, there she is, on how we can make sure that not only talking earlier about STEAM and getting girls into STEM and STEAM programs, but also into coding. So that was one of the other partners that we had along the way. And you talked about some actions that might be in our best interest to consider that could require legislative action. And I want to acknowledge that we have such a great representation from our legislature here today, who is spending a late evening on, when you're not even in interims, to spend on this, which really reflects the passion and commitment that you have to these core issues. So thank you for spending your time and being here. That speaks volumes. Dr. Marr, I'm going to pitch the next one to you. We really appreciate Dr. Marr participating on this panel on behalf of President Gilbert, but I actually think that you're uniquely qualified to answer a question that maybe even the President couldn't speak to. So we're going to pitch this one to you. Dr. Marr had a stellar academic career to begin with, but then spent a couple of decades in industry, in the private sector. And then helped to manage our Chemical Alliance Zone, so not just seeing the world from the view of one sector or one industry, but also for many of those companies that came into contact with the Chemical Alliance Zone before he moved on to higher education. So tell us, given that perspective of understanding industry needs, and we recognize that industries are different, but industry needs and then seeing what happens at higher ed, how do those two fit together? And how can higher ed do a better job of stepping up to meet those needs of industry as they have demands for jobs that the Secretary talked about? And maybe even if you have ideas about, from your industry experience, K-12, even before higher ed.
Sure. Well, I can tell you that what employers want is employees to be instantaneously available, but yet infinitely adaptable. So, you know, their ideal is something that we can't attain, and I'll get to that a little bit later. You know, one of the things we have to recognize in higher education and in education in general is that in the past, we were selectors. We brought people into the system. Some succeeded, some failed. Those that, you know, failed, you know, were diverted. Those that succeeded perhaps reached the pinnacle of intellectual achievement, which might be, in some circles, a degree in chemistry. Who knows? Anyway. But, you know, nowadays, we're faced with challenges that are much deeper and much broader, where we can't just be selectors, we have to be promoters of participation in education at all levels, and promoters of the success of those folks who enter into our system. And the reasons for that are manifold, but the world has changed over the last 30 years in some very dramatic ways. There's greater foreign competition. We have to mobilize a greater proportion of our population into the educated sector. So that idea where a professor says to his or her class at the beginning of the semester, you know, turn to your left, turn to your right, one of you will not be here next semester. You know, that's really not the way that we ought to be approaching this as we look at ourselves as educators. We want to draw in more folks, and we want to make more folks successful if our state and our nation are going to be successful in the competition that we have to engage. And that's where we ought to have our sights focused. It's not on our internecine conflict, but on the competition that's out there in the country and in the world. And the things that you are doing, Mayor, in terms of regional alliances are really visionary, and they're going to help us compete in this region very effectively. And we're seeing it all across the board in biomedical research and other things where institutions like WVU, University of Kentucky, University of Cincinnati, Marshall, say, hey, you know, altogether we have a substantial proportion of NIH research. We're just letting those big guys beat us out by sort of fighting among ourselves. And those types of alliances and strategic partnerships are going to work very well for us. The other thing that's going on is change is rapid pace, and academia is not really known for being a really sort of nimble operation. But we're going to have to be, because when people come to me and say, hey, I really like what your faculty are doing in coding or in cybersecurity, but they can't teach what we have to teach because it changes so rapidly. So these are indicators that we have to kind of work in a different way. You know, we can't, the old paradigm in industry was you took a product in research and then you threw it over the wall to development and they looked at it, you know, then they would pass it on to engineering and they would do something, and then finally would get over to production, and because there had been no coordination across the product development cycle, things were a mess by the time you got to the end. We kind of do the same thing with education. We sort of throw students over the wall and, well, you catch them, college, and throw them over the wall and say, well, you, Mr. Employer, you make something of this. We have to be more coordinated and start to work in terms of integrated partnerships, which will help us address these escalating requirements that we're seeing. The supply versus demand thing that I see in higher education all the time is like, the employers say we want employees, and higher education says, well, what do you want them to know? And trying to get that timing correct is very, very difficult. We're always sort of off cycle educating people to do things that employers are no longer interested in. And again, the key is coordination and partnership. And there are some very effective ones going on. You mentioned Alcon and WVU. There are several going on with RCBI at Marshall University, where employers and higher education are actively discussing what has to be done, and not sort of looking at each other as sort of, you know, supplier and customer, but as partner. And it works out a lot better that way. So I would just want to finish by saying that by integrating and making these handoffs that we have to do much more seamless, we'll address a lot of the questions that we have. And because we're small and because we know one another very well, I think we're going to be a lot more effective at it than some other places are. So I see a lot of hope. I really do. That's my story.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. It's great to hear that perspective, and I will say, you know, I came to higher ed, to WVU from Senate office, a federal office, and seeing those applications for NIH and other dollars come in and collide in my email box rather than work together and capture was really frustrating, and knowing how much talent there was out there that we could really win the day. It's great to know that we have a new day, a new opportunity to stack hands, as President Gee said earlier, and to partner not only among higher education and with government, but up and down the chain on stackable opportunities and within K-12 and beyond, and then with our other partners. So in the spirit of cooperation and alignment and partnering, I'll throw one to you, President Gee, which this is your idea, baby, that you've been talking about now for a couple of years, and I think the visionary component of this whole practice is getting us to align, and we've already seen that magic start to happen. It is infrequent that you have an effort or a movement that pulls people in because they see their mission and their work reflected in that effort in a way that's inviting and empowering and has room for everyone, and you've structured this effort in that way. I think it's great that these are our partners, the representatives of these three institutions. Tell us, President Gee, what's your vision for other partners and stakeholders as we move forward?
Well, great question. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. 1.8 million West Virginians. I think that my vision is the fact that we have to make certain that this is not a inside baseball concept, but rather that we are working very, very closely together. One of the things that we did this summer is the fact many of you know that I try to visit almost every county in the summer, 55 counties. But what we did this summer was we went out and listened very carefully. It was a listening tour. What are your needs? What are your wants? How can we help the county commission? How can we help the superintendents? How can we help the public schools? And what kinds of things do you need to hear? And what do you want to have happen? I think we all know. And I apologize, my voice is about gone. You're blessed by that. But the point is that we now have an opportunity, instead of dividing ourselves into parties and partisan conversations, we can talk about one thing, and that is how do we move this state forward together? And that's going to have to be done through small groups, through people joining with you, Rocky, with all of the kind of options for people to get engaged. The point is this is not about politics. This is about the opportunity for people to sustain their lives in a way that is much better, and in doing it, that everyone can participate. Public education, we need to really focus on that. You know, Woody, let me just make one point. I couldn't agree with you more. University life is not for everyone. Education is for everyone. Yes. You know, I love this figure. Since 2008, there are 13 million jobs have been created in this country. Only 80,000 of those jobs have required only a high school education. So what does that say? That says that education, in some form or other, is important. And so it's getting those educational institutions together. But the final point that I'll make about this is that, and I'm so glad the mayor is here, we've got to start thinking about ourselves as not being afraid to partner with everyone, and to think about how we can take advantage. Carnegie Mellon is the leading institution in this country in terms of driverless automobiles, a variety of other things. They can't do it all there. We can be their partner. The opportunity for how we really deal with energy issues, we have a program going with the Ohio State University. Those kinds of things where we get rid of competition and move to collaboration. The problem that we have in this state is the fact that we have a cacophony of voices. We need to have a chorus, yes, and we need to move to that very quickly. So that is the way that we're trying to do it.
And I think tonight is one example of this public education collaborative bringing all of the really passionate education groups together along with our lawmakers, our policymakers, to try to turn that into a chorus. You're not serving on an education group unless you're passionate about it. You don't do it, right, Dr. Kortz? We don't do this for the money or the fame. You are working on education issues because it's really meaningful to you and to the community and to the future. So again, we thank you for your time. We'll open the room up to questions. I know we're later in the evening than we had anticipated, so you'll be excused if there are a few questions and you want to engage straight away in West Virginia Forward. We'll just give you a job to do, and you don't have to ask any questions.
Don't talk about asking questions.
But if you want to, you've got your panel of experts on West Virginia Forward on how we can support each other, turn into a stacked hand chorus to optimize our opportunities for new jobs that are coming down the pike and to streamline our efforts better in all of those educational opportunities for students who are coming through.
While questions are being considered, let me sort of agree with what Dr. Gee just said. Never before has, I think, there been the collaboration between the universities and state government that we see today. And I think that's terribly important. We're so small and we have so many similarities and we essentially know everybody else in the state. But we really have not worked closely together in the past. They have really been separate institutions doing their own thing, very much to the detriment of the state. And I think under this initiative with Marshall and WVU and teaming with the state, it is very much a new day. First thing you have to do to solve a problem is have good dialogue. And this whole process of Move Forward, West Virginia Forward, has generated tremendous dialogue among the engaged parties. And I think you're going to see results from everybody sort of working together in a collaborative effort.
Thank you for that, Secretary. Yes.
I have a question for the three of you. One of the things that I've seen in the legislature that is a bright spot to me is the community college system in the state of West Virginia. It seems to me that we're spread out pretty nicely geographically, and we're in a position to do some good training for jobs that will come in the future. I just would like to know, do you factor that into your analysis at all? And I just, in my hometown of Weirton, we do plastics manufacturing training right now, real time, and have for a couple of years, and I think that's something that's going to be important going forward. But I think it can be done throughout the state because the beacons are there in a nice pattern, a geographic pattern. So I'd like to hear your comments to that.
Well, you can take that, John, but I'll say very quickly, that really goes back to what I said to Woody a little bit earlier, and that is the fact that it is not about, higher education, it's about a continuing educated workforce. And by the way, I think we could estimate there are probably 20+ thousand jobs available in the state for which we don't have trained people, at least. And so the community colleges and the technical colleges play an enormously important role. What I believe that Marshall and West Virginia University are about, we're about creating the ideas that create the jobs. The community colleges are about training the people to take those ideas and turn them into manufacturing and into sophisticated programs. And so the old days of there being competition, that has to end. Higher education finally has to say the emperor has no clothes, and we're going to start cooperating and collaborating with each other. Otherwise, we're all going to fail. And you've hit it right on the head as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, to that I would agree. You know, we have the Robert C. Byrd Institute for Advanced and Flexible Manufacturing. Those folks work all across the state in composites manufacturing. They're now they have an I-6 Commerce grant for an aerospace initiative in the Huntington area. And they also have participated with the Department of Labor on a very important aspect we haven't talked about yet, and that is apprenticeship programs, which really are a true partnership between higher education or education and the employer, where, you know, the experience is really shared. So, you know, there are a lot of models that we have, and I agree totally. We should be looking to those folks who have the beacons and sharing and trying to scale those sort of smaller scale programs where we can. And that'll be something that will feed Secretary Thrasher's need for speed as we go forward.
Well, I always take a little bit of a contrarian view, and we do have a great number of community and technical colleges spread uniformly across the state of West Virginia. But the economy of West Virginia is not going to uniformly come up. Certain segments and areas are going to see greater growth in different areas than other areas are going to see. And I think if we had a CTC system that allowed for flow of resources and personnel to where the needs are at that particular time, a little more nimble, I think we could even accomplish even better things than we accomplish now. We've got a great backbone, but we've got to be able to move to where the real demand is, and that changes.
And I'll say Dr. Sarah Tucker isn't with us tonight. She's creating life and should be
Right.
not even doing anything under doctor's orders except creating life at the moment. But she is an amazing talent who has been responsible, I think, for some of the positive things that you've noted. And if there's anybody who can be nimble with crafting a system, it's Sarah Tucker. So I think whether it's the accomplishments that have been talked about thus far in that CTC system and the retraining and the on-demand, or whether it's looking forward for even a more nimble, more plastic system, we'll rely and partner with Dr. Tucker on that.
Well, Dr. Tucker is very flexible in that regard. She and Steve Payne and I get together for lunch about every second or third week, and she is totally open to seeing how those CTCs can be the most effective they can be. Really think she's doing a super job around that group.
Other questions?
I'll start out with a comment followed by a question to my legislative colleagues. Failure is not going to be an option. It's really not. But we're going to have to move in this direction because the only thing that's going to pull this state out of where it's at right now is growth. And the three individuals sitting up here are going to work with us to see that growth occurs. Now, as my colleagues can attest, some of this is going to come easier than other things. Some of this will be pretty tough fights. I want for you, the three institutions that you recognize, don't leave us hanging. You're going to have to get behind us, lobby, work, and push this through to get everybody on the same page. Everybody committed?
Yes, sir.
You know,
Just
what a
say
great-
yes, just say yes, sir.
yes. I want to make another point, though. And I'm sorry for taking the time. But that's precisely the way we've structured it this way. Because we know that if McKinsey or someone had come in and they'd been under a legislative mandate, everyone had said it's political. Or everyone has said that there was some skullduggery or whatever. It's just the nature of cynicism. The reason we structured it so that the universities are doing this along with Woody is the fact that we can be aircraft carriers. You know, I would tell you, I'm not running for election. You are. But so any time that arrows get pointed at you, just send them my way. You know, I'm very flexible in that regard. And that's the point. The point is the fact that you have to have the ability to say that this is nonsense and we got to move forward and to do it without a political conversation taking place. And I think that's the power of where we are. And by the way, the most important thing is the fact that we're a small state. Everyone can hear that message very quickly. So not only are we in, I think this is the way to break the back of partisanship in so many different ways.
Well, I think one fundamental thing you got to overcome is the reluctance to change. If you're fairly well-to-do and you want to change something, it's not such a big deal to change. But if you don't have very much and you want to change, your first reaction is fear. I'm going to lose what little bit I have. And I think we've, as a state, have become too fearful of change. And I think as legislators, you really have to recognize that if we're going to do anything different than what we've done, we're going to have significant change in how we go about doing it. And don't be afraid of it, and really try it. I can tell you when we put all the DNR websites so you could actually make an online reservation, there were a number of people within DNR that didn't think that was a very good idea. And
There's some people over here smiling.
and that's where you have to be open to change.
I say to everyone, sacred cows make the best hamburgers.
Other questions? All right. Well, if we have no further questions, we've now signed you all up to participate in one form or fashion or another, whether you're going to give us advice or guidance or contribute
Thank you
in
very
some
much.
other way
Appreciate
to this effort so that we can clarify our goals
you,
as
sir.
we move forward. And we want to be here to support you. So as you go through your day tomorrow and you hear more, Matt Harbaugh's here. He's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the deeper dive West Virginia Forward findings in an area that may be very relevant to your conversation. And as you walk through the rest of the agenda and take apart this issue of public education and try to determine what your needs are, we want to be supportive of those action items and needs, because we do have now a collaboration of the willing to support that effort. So without further ado, we'll thank you all for joining tonight and for attending tomorrow, and for the Public Education Collaborative for hosting.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You just do it every day, right?
I'm getting used to it.